Christmas dinner at Mom's house in suburban Denver. I sat quietly at the mahogany table while my sister Madison bragged about her new three-bedroom ranch house purchased with her husband Craig. Mom beamed with pride, then turned to me with that familiar, disappointed expression. "Your sister just bought a beautiful house? When will you finally settle down and make something of yourself?" Madison smirked knowingly. The extended family stared expectantly. I took a slow sip of wine, set down my glass, and smiled calmly. "I already did settle down, Mom. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me." The silence that followed my words was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room. Mom's fork froze halfway to her mouth, a piece of turkey dangling precariously. Madison's smirk vanished like someone had flipped a switch. Uncle Robert, Dad's older brother, leaned forward in his chair with narrowed eyes. Aunt Patricia stopped mid-chew, her jaw working mechanically, while her brain tried to process what I'd just said. "What exactly do you mean by that, Jayden, Harry?" Mom's voice carried that sharp edge I knew so well, the one that appeared whenever she felt challenged or confused. I set down my wine glass carefully, taking a moment to look around the table at faces I'd known my entire life. These people had watched me grow up, had celebrated my high school graduation, had been there when I'd announced my decision to leave college and pursue my dreams. They'd also been there when I'd failed, when I'd stumbled, when I'd made mistakes that seemed to confirm every doubt they'd ever voiced about my choices. "I mean exactly what I said," I replied, keeping my voice steady and calm. "I've settled down. I have a successful business, a wonderful relationship, and a life I'm proud of. The only difference is that I stopped seeking approval from people who were determined not to give it." Grandmother Rose, who'd been quietly observing from the head of the table, set down her coffee cup with a gentle clink. At 82, she was the matriarch of our family, the one person whose opinion still carried weight with everyone present. Her pale blue eyes studied my face with the kind of intensity that made me feel like she could see straight through to my soul. "Tell us about this business, sweetheart," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried a husband while building a small fortune through careful investments and shrewd decision-making. I glanced around the table once more, noting the skeptical expressions, the barely concealed eye rolls from Madison, the defensive posture Mom had adopted with her arms crossed over her chest. These were the same people who'd called me irresponsible when I'd quit my corporate job at 28. The same ones who'd labeled me a dreamer when I'd announced my plans to start my own digital marketing agency. 3 years ago, I started Pinnacle Digital Solutions from my studio apartment in Capitol Hill. I had $1,200 in my checking account, a laptop that was already 5 years old, and one client who was willing to pay me $800 to redesign their website. Uncle Robert snorted derisively. $800? That's not a business, nephew. That's a hobby that pays grocery money. You're right. I acknowledged, surprising him with my agreement. $800 wasn't a business, but it was a beginning. That first client was a local restaurant owner named Maria Santos. She was struggling to bring in customers during the pandemic, and her old website looked like it hadn't been updated since 2005. I didn't just redesign her site. I created a complete digital presence for her restaurant. Social media strategy online, ordering system, customer review management, targeted advertising campaigns. I paused, watching as Uncle Robert's expression shifted from smugness to curiosity. Within 6 months, Maria's revenue increased by 40%. She was so happy with the results that she started referring other small business owners to me. Word spread. I reinvested every dollar I made back into the business, learning new skills, buying better equipment, taking online courses to stay current with digital marketing trends. Madison leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed in a mirror image of Mom's defensive posture. "That's great, Jayden, but lots of people do freelance work. It doesn't mean you're running some kind of empire." You're absolutely right again, I said, reaching for my phone. Freelance work isn't the same as running a business, which is why I stopped being a freelancer about 2 years ago. I pulled up my company's website and turned the screen toward the table. The professional design showcased client testimonials, case studies, and team member profiles. Pinnacle Digital Solutions now employs 12 full-time staff members. We have a graphic designer, 3 social media specialists, 2 web developers, a content writer, a project manager, a client relations coordinator, and 2 junior marketing associates. We also work with a network of freelance contractors for specialized projects. Cousin Derek, who'd been quietly working on his second helping of mashed potatoes, looked up with genuine interest. 12 employees, where's your office? We have a 2,500 square foot space in the Rhino district, I replied. Open floor plan conference rooms, a break area with a full kitchen. I signed a 5-year lease last January. The numbers were starting to penetrate the fog of skepticism around the table. Mom uncrossed her arms, her expression shifting from defensive to confused. Jayden, how could you afford to hire 12 people and rent office space? You never said anything about making that kind of money. Because every time I tried to talk about my work, someone at this table would make a comment about when I was going to get a real job, I said quietly. When I left Henderson and Associates 3 years ago, you told me I was throwing away my future. When I explained that I wanted to build something of my own, Madison said it was just another one of my failed experiments. When I missed Dad's birthday dinner because I was working with a client in crisis, you said I was being irresponsible and putting foolish dreams ahead of family. The weight of those memories settled over the table like a heavy blanket. I could see the recognition dawning in Mom's eyes, the realization that her protective instincts had morphed into something that felt more like rejection to the person on the receiving end. Last year, I continued, Pinnacle Digital Solutions generated $2.4 million in revenue. After expenses, salaries, taxes, and reinvestment in growth, I personally took home just under $400,000. This year, we're on track to break $3 million in revenue. Uncle Robert's coffee cup clattered against his saucer. $400,000? His voice cracked slightly on the words. The Colorado Business Journal featured us in their 30 Under 30 Emerging Companies Spotlight last spring, I added. We've worked with clients ranging from local startups to subsidiaries of Fortune 500 companies. 3 months ago, we signed a contract with a Denver-based tech company to handle all their digital marketing for the next 2 years. The contract alone is worth $1.2 million. Aunt Patricia, who made a living spreading gossip through their suburban neighborhood, looked like someone had just told her that her neighbor's garden gnomes were actually worth millions of dollars. Her mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound. I don't understand, Madison said, her voice smaller than it had been all evening. Why didn't you ever tell us any of this? Why did you let us think you were struggling? The question hung in the air, heavy with years of complicated family dynamics. I thought about Dad's funeral 2 years ago, where family members had whispered about how disappointed he must have been that his son couldn't hold down a steady job. I remembered the Christmas before that, when Uncle Robert had cornered me with a lecture about responsibility and the importance of providing for a future family. I recalled Madison's wedding 4 years earlier, where she'd introduced me to her friends as her brother, who was still figuring out his life. Because, I said finally, I learned that sharing good news with people who are invested in believing you'll fail is like planting seeds in concrete. Nothing grows except resentment. The truth of that statement settled over the table like snow covering everything in a cold, uncomfortable silence. These people loved me, I knew that. But somewhere along the way, their love had become tangled up with their fears, their expectations, their own definitions of success and failure. They'd created a version of me in their minds that was easier to worry about than celebrate, and I'd stopped trying to convince them otherwise. Grandmother Rose reached across the table and placed her weathered hand over mine. Your father would be so proud, she said quietly. He always knew you had something special inside you. He just worried that the world might not recognize it before you did. Madison's face had gone through several color changes during my business revelation, settling somewhere between pale and green. But now, as the reality of my success continued to sink in, I watched her expression shift to something that looked almost like panic. "If you're doing so well," she said, her voice gaining strength as she grasped for some way to regain control of the narrative. "Why are you still single? Success isn't everything, Jayden. Craig and I have built a real life together. We're partners. We support each other. When are you going to find someone and stop being so focused on work that you forget about what really matters?" I felt that familiar knot form in my stomach, the one that appeared whenever family conversations turned to my personal life. It was the same feeling I'd experienced in high school when Mom had criticized Emma, my first serious girlfriend, for being too focused on art instead of more practical subjects. The same sensation that had overwhelmed me in college when the family had made Anna, a pre-med student I dated for 8 months, feel so unwelcome at family gatherings that she'd eventually stopped coming. Madison. I said carefully, "What makes you think I'm single?" The question landed like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples of confusion around the table. Mom's eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. Uncle Robert leaned forward again, his detective instincts activated. Aunt Patricia practically vibrated with anticipation of new information to process, and eventually spread through her social networks. "What do you mean?" Madison demanded. "You never bring anyone to family events. You never mention dating. You've been alone at every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering for the past 2 years." "I've been alone at family gatherings by choice," I corrected. "Not because I don't have someone special in my life, but because I learned from experience that bringing someone I care about into this environment isn't fair to them." The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. This wasn't shock or confusion. This was the heavy, uncomfortable quiet that settles over a room when everyone suddenly realizes they might have been complicit in something they never intended to be part of. Grandmother Rose set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "What happened, sweetheart?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for a conversation I'd hoped to avoid for the rest of my life. "Do any of you remember Emma Patterson? My girlfriend's senior year of high school?" Mom's face flushed slightly. She was a lovely girl, very artistic. I agreed. She was also incredibly smart, funny, and kind. She planned to study graphic design at the Art Institute of Colorado. She wanted to work for a design firm and eventually start her own studio. She had talent, ambition, and a clear vision for her future. "I remember her," Madison said defensively. "She was nice enough, but she was always so intense about her art projects. Mom was just trying to help you think practically about the future." Mom told me that Emma was a dreamer who would never be able to support herself, let alone contribute to a stable household, I said quietly. "She suggested that I might want to date someone with more realistic goals, someone studying business or education, someone who understood the importance of financial security." Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Your mother was looking out for your best interests." "Emma broke up with me 2 weeks before prom," I continued. "She said she couldn't handle the pressure of feeling like she had to prove herself worthy of me to my family. She said she felt like she was being judged for having dreams that didn't fit into a neat conventional box." Mom's face was now fully flushed, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. "Jayden, I never meant to hurt her. I just wanted you to think about compatibility and shared values." "Emma Patterson," I said, pulling out my phone again, "now owns one of the most successful graphic design studios in Denver. She's married to a wonderful man who appreciates her creativity and ambition. They have 2 beautiful children and a house in Cherry Creek that's featured in Colorado Homes and Lifestyles magazine twice. She's exactly who she always planned to be." I swiped to a different screen on my phone. Anna Martinez. Remember her pre-med at University of Colorado? We dated for 8 months during my junior year. Aunt Patricia nodded eagerly. Pretty girl, very serious about her studies. Anna is now Dr. Anna Martinez Thompson, I said. She's a pediatric cardiologist at Children's Hospital Colorado. She's saved hundreds of children's lives, published research that's changed treatment protocols worldwide, and is married to another doctor who thinks she hung the moon. They live in Boulder with their 3 kids and volunteer at free clinics in underserved communities. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone at the table, and the discomfort was palpable. I could see Madison beginning to understand where this was heading, her earlier confidence crumbling, as she realized the implications of what I was revealing. Anna stopped coming to family events after Thanksgiving my senior year. I continued. She said she felt like she was being interrogated every time she walked through the door. Questions about whether she'd have time for a family with such a demanding career. Comments about how medical school debt might impact our future financial stability. Suggestions that maybe she should consider something less time-consuming, like nursing or teaching. Mom's hands had stopped fidgeting with her napkin. Now they lay flat on the table, trembling slightly. I was trying to help you think through important considerations. Jessica Williams. I said, not waiting for more justification. We dated for 10 months after college. She was working on her MBA at Denver University, planning a career in nonprofit management. She wanted to work for organizations that addressed homelessness and poverty. Cousin Derek, who'd been silently absorbing everything, looked up from his plate. I remember Jessica. She seemed really passionate about her work. I agreed. She was also incredibly patient with this family's questions about whether nonprofit work would provide enough financial security for a future family. She endured conversations about how idealistic young people often have to adjust their expectations when reality sets in. She listened to suggestions that she might want to consider transitioning to for-profit business once she gained some experience. I scrolled through more photos on my phone, landing on a recent news article. Jessica Williams is now the executive director of Mountain States Housing Initiative, the largest homeless services organization in Colorado. She's been featured on the cover of Denver magazine as one of the city's most influential leaders under 40. She's married to a social worker who shares her passion for service, and together, they've created programs that have housed over 2,000 families. The weight of the pattern was settling over the table like a lead blanket. 3 women, 3 successful futures, 3 relationships that had ended not because of incompatibility or lack of love, but because of family interference and judgment disguised as concern. Each of these women, I said quietly, was exactly who she said she was going to become. Each of them had the strength, intelligence, and determination to achieve her goals. And each of them decided that loving me wasn't worth enduring constant questioning of her worth, her choices, and her dreams. Madison's voice came out as barely a whisper. Jayden, we didn't know. We thought we were looking out for you. I know, I said. But after Jessica, I made a decision. I decided that if I was ever lucky enough to find someone else who was willing to share her life with me, I wouldn't subject her to this family's version of protective concern. I wouldn't risk losing another person I cared about because she felt like she had to prove herself worthy of love to people who had already decided she wasn't enough. Grandmother Rose reached for her water glass with shaking hands. Are you saying there is someone, sweetheart, someone you've been protecting from us? I looked around the table one more time, seeing faces I'd known since childhood, people who'd celebrated my first steps and my high school graduation, who'd held me when I cried and cheered when I succeeded. People who loved me, but had somehow lost sight of how to show that love in ways that felt supportive rather than suffocating. Yes, I said simply, there is someone extraordinary, someone I've been engaged to for 8 months, Someone who makes me laugh every day and challenges me to be better than I thought I could be. Someone who sees the best in people and believes in dreams that others might call impossible. The gasp from Mom was audible. Madison's fork clattered against her plate. Uncle Robert's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Aunt Patricia looked like she might hyperventilate. Engaged. Mom's voice cracked on the word. You're engaged and you didn't tell us you're planning a wedding without your family? I'm planning a wedding with the family I've chosen, I replied. The family that consists of people who celebrate love instead of questioning it. People who believe in supporting dreams instead of cautioning against them. People who think the most important question about someone you want to marry is whether they make you happy, not whether they meet some arbitrary standard of conventional success. Before anyone could respond to my revelation about being engaged, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the tension like a knife, startling everyone at the table. Mom looked around in confusion, as if she couldn't quite process another unexpected element in an evening that had already completely derailed from her expectations. I'll get it, Cousin Derek offered, rising from his chair with obvious relief at having an excuse to escape the increasingly heavy atmosphere. We're not expecting anyone else, Mom murmured, smoothing her hair nervously. Everyone who was invited is already here. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket and glanced at the screen. A text message made my heart skip a beat, and I couldn't suppress the smile that spread across my face as I read it. Actually, I said, standing up from the table, I think we are expecting someone. The voices from the entryway grew clearer as Derek led someone toward the dining room. A woman's laugh floated through the house, warm and musical, followed by Derek's animated conversation about traffic from the airport. Madison's eyes widened as she processed the implication of someone arriving from the airport, while Mom's face cycled through confusion, anticipation, and something that looked remarkably like panic. Jayden. The voice that called my name was cultured, confident, and filled with affection. I hope I'm not interrupting dinner. My meeting ended early and I caught an earlier flight. I was hoping to surprise you and finally meet your family. I moved toward the dining room entrance just as she appeared, and the contrast between the tension-filled room behind me and her radiant presence was almost comical. Sophia Chen Williams stepped into the doorway, wearing an elegant navy wool coat over what I knew would be a perfectly tailored travel outfit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, despite having just spent 3 hours on an airplane, and she carried herself with the kind of poise that came from years of commanding corporate boardrooms. Everyone, I said, feeling my heart swell with pride and love, I'd like you to meet Sophia, my fiancée. If the earlier silences had been uncomfortable, this one was absolutely electric. You could practically see the wheels turning in everyone's minds as they tried to reconcile their assumptions about my life with the elegant, accomplished woman now standing in their dining room. Sophia moved into the room with graceful confidence, carrying a beautiful leather bag that I recognized as the one she used for client gifts and important occasions. She'd clearly come prepared for this meeting, despite my repeated warnings about keeping our relationship private from my family. Mrs. Morrison, she said, extending her hand toward my mother with a warm smile. It's such a pleasure to finally meet you. Jayden speaks about you constantly. Mom stood awkwardly, clearly flustered by Sophia's polished presentation and professional demeanor. She accepted the handshake but seemed uncertain how to respond to someone who was simultaneously meeting her for the first time and announcing an engagement to her son. I brought some small gifts. Sophia continued opening her leather bag with practiced ease. I know showing up unannounced is terribly rude, but when my consultation in Chicago wrapped up ahead of schedule, I couldn't resist the chance to surprise Jayden and meet the people who raised such an incredible man. She pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it to Mom. Jayden mentioned that you collect vintage teacups. I found this at an antique shop in Lincoln Park. The dealer said it's from a 1920s English set. Mom unwrapped the gift with trembling fingers, revealing an exquisite porcelain teacup with delicate hand-painted roses. Her eyes widened as she examined the piece, clearly recognizing its quality and value. "This is beautiful," Mom whispered. "But you didn't need to bring gifts. We should be the ones welcoming you." "Nonsense," Sophia replied warmly. "I'm the one intruding on your family Christmas. It's the least I could do." She turned to Madison, pulling out another wrapped package. "You must be Madison. I brought you something from my favorite art supply store in Chicago. Jayden told me you studied art in college, and I thought you might enjoy these specialty watercolor pencils. They're from a small Italian company that makes the most incredible pigments." Madison accepted the gift with obvious surprise, unwrapping it to reveal a set of professional-grade art supplies that probably cost more than she typically spent on groceries in a month. Her eyes filled with unexpected tears as she touched the beautiful pencils, each one labeled with exotic color names in Italian. "I haven't painted in years," she admitted quietly. "Then these will be waiting for you whenever you're ready to start again," Sophia replied gently. She worked her way around the table, presenting thoughtful gifts to each family member. Uncle Robert received a book about the history of jazz in America, which she'd apparently chosen because Jayden had mentioned his extensive record collection. Aunt Patricia got a beautiful silk scarf from a boutique near Michigan Avenue. Cousin Derek received a photography coffee table book featuring the work of emerging artists. For Grandmother Rose, Sophia had chosen something particularly special, a small framed photograph of the house where Dad had grown up, which she'd somehow managed to research and locate during her business trip to Chicago. "Jayden told me that your late husband grew up on the South Side," Sophia explained, as Grandmother Rose examined the photograph with amazement. "I took a small detour during my visit and found the house. The current owners were lovely enough to let me take this picture. Jayden says you have wonderful stories about visiting there when you were first married." By this point, the entire family was staring at Sophia, with expressions ranging from awe to bewilderment. Here was someone who had not only taken the time to research their individual interests, but had managed to find meaningful personal gifts while juggling a business trip to another city. The level of thoughtfulness and effort was so far beyond what any of them had expected that they seemed unsure how to process it. "What kind of work do you do in Chicago?" Uncle Robert asked, his natural curiosity finally overcoming his shock. "I'm a corporate attorney," Sophia replied, settling into the chair Derek had brought from the kitchen. "I specialize in intellectual property and business acquisitions. My firm represents several technology companies, and one of our Chicago clients needed help with a merger. It's been a complex negotiation, but we finally reached an agreement yesterday." Aunt Patricia leaned forward with interest. "Are you from Chicago originally?" "Actually, I grew up in Portland, Oregon," Sophia answered. "My parents are both professors at Portland State University. Dad teaches economics, Mom teaches literature. I went to law school at Northwestern, which is how I ended up in the Midwest initially. After graduation, I moved to Denver for a position at my current firm." I watched my family absorb this information, seeing their mental calculations as they tried to fit Sophia into their preconceived notions about my life and choices. Here was someone who was clearly successful, educated, and accomplished, but also warm, thoughtful, and genuine. She wasn't the unstable dreamer or impractical idealist they'd apparently expected me to choose. "How did you and Jayden meet?" Madison asked, her voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been envy. Sophia smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "At a business conference in Chicago 18 months ago. There was a panel discussion about digital marketing trends, and Jayden was one of the featured speakers. His presentation about authentic storytelling and brand development was brilliant. I was so impressed that I approached him afterward to discuss some ideas for my firm's client outreach strategies." "You spoke at a business conference?" Mom asked me, her voice filled with amazement. "Several conferences," Sophia answered for me. "Jayden's become quite well known in digital marketing circles. He's keynoted events in 5 different cities this year. His company's case studies are used as examples in business school courses. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the wine I'd been drinking. This was what it felt like to have someone believe in you, support you, and celebrate your achievements without reservation or qualification. We spent 3 hours talking after that conference, Sophia continued, about business, about life, about dreams and goals, and the importance of building something meaningful. I've never met anyone who combined such innovative thinking with such genuine integrity. By the end of our conversation, I knew I wanted to know everything about him. Grandmother Rose was studying Sophia with the same intensity she'd focused on me earlier. "And what did you learn, dear?" "I learned that Jayden is exactly who he appears to be," Sophia replied without hesitation. "Kind, brilliant, hardworking, and completely committed to treating people with respect and dignity. I learned that he builds businesses the same way he builds relationships, with patience, authenticity, and genuine care for others' success." She paused, looking around the table with a gentle smile. "I also learned that he comes from a family that loves him deeply, even when they don't always know how to show it in ways that feel supportive to him. That's why I was so excited when my trip ended early. I've been hoping for a chance to meet all of you and to tell you personally how much your son means to me." The warmth in Sophia's voice and her genuine enthusiasm for meeting my family seemed to thaw some of the frozen shock around the table. Mom's shoulders had relaxed slightly, and even Madison appeared to be reconsidering her initial defensive reaction. But I could still see the underlying tension, the unspoken questions about how someone like Sophia had ended up with someone like me, at least according to their previous assessments of my life trajectory. "Where are you two living now?" Aunt Patricia asked, her gossipy instincts unable to resist gathering more information about this unexpected development in the family narrative. Sophia glanced at me with a slight smile, clearly sensing the minefield of family dynamics she'd walked into. "We have a place in Boulder," she said diplomatically. "An apartment." Madison pressed, and I could hear the subtle attempt to establish some kind of hierarchy in her question. Her tone suggested she was hoping our living situation might be somehow less impressive than the 3-bedroom ranch house she and Craig had recently purchased with enormous fanfare and family celebration. "Actually," Sophia replied, completely missing or choosing to ignore the competitive undertone, "we have a house. Well, houses, technically. Our primary residence is in the foothills above Boulder, but Jayden also has rental properties here in Denver, and we just purchased a vacation place in Aspen that we're renovating." The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the antique clock in Mom's living room ticking from 2 rooms away. Madison's face went through several color changes as she processed the plural form of houses, while Craig shifted uncomfortably in his chair beside her. "Houses," Uncle Robert repeated slowly, as if he needed to hear the word again to believe it. "Our main house is about 4,000 square feet." Sophia continued, apparently unaware of the bomb she'd just dropped on my family's assumptions. "We worked with an architect to design something that would take advantage of the mountain views, while still feeling warm and livable. It's taken almost a year to complete, but we finally moved in this fall." She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through photos. Jayden was very specific about creating spaces that would be good for entertaining and family gatherings. "There's a large deck that overlooks the Flatirons, and we designed the kitchen to be the heart of the house. He said he hoped someday his family would want to come visit and spend time with us there." The implicit invitation in her words hung in the air, along with the growing realization that everything they thought they knew about my financial situation had been completely wrong. I watched Mom struggle to reconcile the image of her underachieving son with the reality of someone who owned multiple properties and had designed a custom home in one of Colorado's most expensive areas. "The rental properties are a great investment," Sophia added conversationally. "Jayden found 2 duplexes in up-and-coming neighborhoods before the areas really took off. The rental income covers the mortgages and provides additional cash flow for business expansion." He has such a good eye for emerging trends, whether it's in real estate or business opportunities. Madison's voice came out strained and barely audible. How much did these houses cost? I watched Sophia consider the question, clearly recognizing the sensitive territory we'd entered. Well, real estate in Colorado has become quite expensive, she said carefully. But Jayden's business success has allowed us to be strategic about our investments. The Boulder house was a significant purchase, but it's already appreciated considerably since we bought the land. Sophia, I said gently, you can be specific. They're going to wonder anyway. She looked at me with a question in her eyes, and I nodded encouragingly. I was tired of managing everyone else's comfort level at the expense of honest communication. The Boulder property was $850,000 for the land, and construction costs came to about $600,000, she said directly. The rental properties were purchased over the past 2 years for a combined $420,000. The Aspen cabin was a foreclosure auction purchase for $290,000, though we're putting about $100,000 into renovations. The numbers hit the table like physical blows. I could see Uncle Robert doing rapid mental calculations while Aunt Patricia's mouth had fallen open in a way that suggested she'd forgotten how to close it. Mom looked like someone had just explained quantum physics to her in a foreign language. But it was Madison's reaction that caught my attention. Her face had gone completely pale, and her hands were shaking as she reached for her wine glass. Craig beside her was staring at his plate with the kind of intensity that suggested he was trying to disappear into the tablecloth. Madison, Mom asked, noticing her daughter's distress. Are you feeling all right? I'm fine, Madison replied quickly, but her voice was tight and thin. It's just, Craig and I just bought our house. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, nice neighborhood. We were so proud of ourselves for making such a big purchase. She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. We put down 5%, $37,000, which took us 3 years to save. Our monthly mortgage payment is $2,800 plus insurance and property taxes. It's stretching our budget, but we thought we were being responsible adults, making a smart investment in our future. The confession hung in the air, revealing not just the stark financial contrast between our situations, but the emotional weight Madison had been carrying about their purchase. What had felt like a major achievement suddenly seemed diminished in comparison to what she'd just learned about my financial position. Craig finally looked up from his plate, his face flushed with embarrassment. I've been working double shifts at the hospital to cover the extra expenses. Madison picked up weekend shifts at the accounting firm. We've been telling ourselves that the sacrifice would be worth it for the stability of homeownership. It is worth it, Sophia said firmly, her voice filled with genuine warmth. Buying your first home is a huge accomplishment regardless of the size or cost. The pride you feel in that achievement is completely valid. Jayden and I are just at a different stage of our careers and our relationship. But Madison wasn't comforted by Sophia's diplomatic response. Instead, she seemed to deflate further into her chair as if the weight of comparison was crushing something inside her that she'd been carefully protecting. Different stage, she repeated bitterly. You mean the stage where you actually know what you're doing with your lives, where you make smart decisions instead of just stumbling from one mistake to another. Madison, I started, but she held up her hand to stop me. No, Jayden. Let me say this. Craig and I have been killing ourselves trying to afford a house we probably can't really afford because we thought it was what successful adults do. We've been stressed about money, constantly arguing about every purchase, sacrificing everything fun in our lives to make ends meet. And the whole time, you've been quietly building this empire while we lectured you about responsibility and settling down. She looked around the table, her eyes bright with unshed tears. We've been so smug about our little house and our conventional life choices. We thought we were the responsible ones, the ones who had our act together. Meanwhile, Jayden was creating actual wealth and building a real future with someone amazing, and we were too invested in our own superiority to notice. The raw honesty in her words created a different kind of silence, one filled not with shock, but with recognition. Everyone at the table seemed to be grappling with their own version of Madison's realization that the family narrative they'd all accepted might have been fundamentally wrong. The Aspen place. Grandmother Rose said quietly, "Is that where you got engaged?" Sophia smiled, her whole face lighting up with the memory. At sunset on the deck we're building, Jayden had arranged for a string quartet to play on the mountainside below us. He said he wanted the moment to be as beautiful as the life he hoped we'd build together. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone again, scrolling to a photo that showed a stunning mountain vista with the sun setting behind snow-capped peaks. He proposed right here with the whole Colorado sky painted orange and purple behind him. It was the most romantic moment of my life. Uncle Robert cleared his throat, his voice gruff with emotion. Your father proposed to your mother on a mountain too, Mount Evans, during a camping trip. He always said there was something about the elevation that made everything clearer, including what really mattered in life. The mention of Dad seemed to break something loose inside Madison that had been building pressure all evening. She set down her wine glass with trembling hands and covered her face with her palms, her shoulders beginning to shake with suppressed emotion. I can't do this anymore, she whispered through her fingers. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when nothing is fine. Craig reached for her hand, but she pulled away from him, shaking her head as if trying to clear away years of accumulated pretense and self-deception. Madison, Mom said gently, what's wrong, sweetheart? Why, what's wrong? Madison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. What's wrong is that I've spent my entire adult life trying to be the perfect daughter, the responsible one, the one who made all the right choices. And it's all been a lie. She looked up from her hands, her eyes red and swimming with tears. Do you want to know the truth? The truth is that I've been jealous of Jayden since we were teenagers. Not jealous of his success because I never believed he'd be successful. Jealous of his courage. The words spilled out of her like water through a broken dam, carrying years of resentment and self-doubt with them. When Jayden left college to pursue his dreams, I called him irresponsible. But the real truth is that I was terrified, because I didn't have the guts to do the same thing. When he started his business, I made fun of it, because I was afraid he might actually succeed at something I'd been too scared to even attempt. She turned to look directly at me, her face streaked with tears and mascara. I dropped out of art school, Jayden. Not because I realized it wasn't practical, but because I was terrified. I wasn't good enough. I was afraid that if I kept trying, I'd find out I didn't have any real talent. So I switched to accounting because it felt safe, because numbers are predictable and there's no subjective judgment involved. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Madison had always been artistic as a child, constantly drawing and painting, talking about becoming an illustrator or a graphic designer. Her switch to accounting had happened so suddenly during her sophomore year that I'd always wondered what had really prompted it. I married Craig because he was safe too. She continued, her voice growing stronger even as her tears flowed more freely. Not because I was madly in love with him, but because he represented everything Mom and Dad said they wanted for us. Stable job, good insurance, conventional goals. I convinced myself that security was more important than passion. Craig's face went white at her words, and I could see the shock and hurt written across his features. He'd clearly had no idea that their marriage had been built on Madison's fear rather than her love. The house. Madison went on, the house was supposed to be proof that we'd made it, that all the compromises and sacrifices had been worth it. But we're drowning financially and emotionally. We work constantly just to afford a life that doesn't even make us happy. And every family gathering, I've had to listen to everyone worry about poor Jayden, while I pretended that my perfect conventional life was everything I'd ever wanted. She wiped her nose with her napkin, leaving streaks of makeup across the fabric. When you walked away from your corporate job, I was secretly hoping you'd fail. Not because I didn't love you, but because your failure would prove that I'd made the right choice in playing it safe. Your success means that I've wasted years of my life being afraid. The honesty of her confession was brutal and beautiful at the same time. I could see my own pain reflected in her words, the pain of feeling misunderstood and unsupported by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. But I could also see something else, the pain of living a life that wasn't authentically yours, of making choices based on fear rather than hope. Madison, Sophia said gently, it's not too late to change course. Jayden didn't find his path overnight, and neither did I. I worked at 3 different law firms before I found the right fit. I took night classes, made lateral moves, even took pay cuts to gain experience in areas that interested me. Building a life you love is an iterative process. But I'm 29 years old, Madison protested. I have a mortgage and responsibilities. I can't just quit my job and go back to art school. Who says you have to quit your job? I asked. You could take evening classes, start painting again as a hobby, and see where it leads. Test the waters before making any major changes. I paused, an idea forming in my mind. Actually, my company could use someone with both artistic skills and business acumen. Marketing materials, client presentations, brand development. If you wanted to explore whether your creative interests could translate into professional opportunities, I could hire you as a freelance consultant. You could keep your current job while you figure out what you really want to pursue. Madison stared at me in amazement. You would do that after the way I've treated you. After all the times I've dismissed your work and made you feel like your choices were wrong. You're my sister, I said simply. I love you even when you're being a pain in the butt. And I understand what it feels like to be scared of disappointing people who matter to you. She began crying harder then. But these tears seemed different from the earlier ones. Less bitter, more cleansing. I've been such a terrible sister to you. I was so caught up in my own insecurity that I couldn't celebrate your achievements. I couldn't even admit to myself that you were achieving anything worth celebrating. Craig, who had been sitting in stunned silence during Madison's confession, finally spoke up. Madison, why didn't you ever tell me any of this? About your art, about your doubts, about feeling like you settled? Because I was afraid you'd realize you could do better, she admitted. Because I was afraid that if I admitted I'd married you for security instead of love, you'd leave me. And then I'd be alone and unsuccessful, and everything Mom always worried I'd become. Craig's expression softened as he processed her words. But what if we could figure out how to build something together that made both of us happy? What if we stopped trying to live up to other people's expectations and started figuring out what we actually wanted? Uncle Robert, who had been unusually quiet during Madison's breakdown, cleared his throat. Your father used to say that the biggest risk in life wasn't failure. It was spending your whole life wondering what might have been if you'd had the courage to try. He looked around the table, his eyes settling on each family member in turn. I think we've all been so focused on protecting each other from disappointment that we forgot to support each other's dreams. And maybe it's time we figured out how to do better. Grandmother Rose nodded slowly, her weathered hands folded in her lap. Your grandfather started his first business when he was 42 years old, she said. Everyone thought he was crazy to leave a secure job during the Depression, but he said he'd rather fail at something he believed in than succeed at something that made him feel empty inside. She smiled at Madison with infinite tenderness. It's never too late to become who you're supposed to be, dear, and you don't have to do it alone. The weight of Madison's confession seemed to hang in the air like smoke, creating a strange clarity that made everything more visible, while simultaneously making it harder to breathe. Mom had been growing progressively quieter as the evening unfolded, her face cycling through emotions I'd rarely seen her express so openly. Confusion, regret, recognition, and something that looked remarkably like grief. Now, as Madison's tears began to subside, and the family absorbed the implications of everything that had been revealed, Mom slowly pushed back her chair and stood up from the table. She moved to the window that looked out over the backyard where Madison and I had played as children, her silhouette framed against the glass, like a portrait of contemplation. "I need to say something." She began, her voice so quiet that we all had to strain to hear her. Something I should have said years ago, but didn't have the wisdom or the courage to understand. She turned back toward the table, and I was shocked to see that her face was streaked with tears. Mom rarely cried, at least not where anyone could see her. She'd always been the strong one, the practical one, the one who held everything together through sheer force of will and determination. "Jayden," she said, looking directly at me, with eyes that held decades of accumulated pain, "you look exactly like your father did at your age. Not just physically, though you have his eyes and his smile. You have his way of moving through the world, his curiosity about everything, his belief that things can be better than they are." She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, in a gesture that was so vulnerable, it made my chest ache. "When your father and I first met, he was 26 years old and working as a freelance architect. He had no steady income, no benefits, no guarantee that his next project would materialize. He lived in a tiny studio apartment and drove a car that broke down every other week. By every practical measure, he was a terrible choice for someone who wanted security and stability." Uncle Robert shifted in his chair, clearly remembering his brother's early struggles. "Those were hard years for both of them." "They were," Mom agreed. "We had months where David would work 18-hour days on a project only to have the client decide they couldn't afford to move forward. We ate a lot of ramen noodles and generic mac and cheese. I worked 2 part-time jobs while he tried to build his reputation and client base." She returned to her seat at the table, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. "But I loved watching him work. He would spread his drawings across every surface in our apartment, talking through problems. Out loud, sketching solutions on napkins during dinner. He saw possibilities where other people saw obstacles. He believed he could create beautiful spaces that would make people's lives better, and he was willing to sacrifice everything comfortable and predictable to pursue that vision." I felt my throat tighten as I listened to her describe a side of Dad I'd never fully understood. He'd always been successful for as long as I could remember, his architectural firm well established and respected. I'd never really thought about the years of uncertainty and struggle that had preceded that success. "Why, when you quit your corporate job to start your business?" Mom continued, "All I could think about was those early years with your father. The stress, the uncertainty, the months when we didn't know if we'd be able to make rent. I couldn't see your potential because I was blinded by my memories of how difficult it had been for David to establish himself." She looked around the table, her gaze settling on each family member before returning to me. "I thought I was protecting you from the pain I'd watched your father endure. I thought I was helping you avoid the mistakes I believed he'd made by choosing passion over security. But I was wrong about everything." Sophia reached across the table and took my hand, her touch grounding me, as Mom's words washed over me like a tide of long overdue understanding. "Your father didn't succeed despite his willingness to take risks," Mom said. "He succeeded because of it. His creativity, his vision, his refusal to accept limitations, those weren't obstacles to overcome. They were his greatest strengths. And when I looked at you making similar choices, I should have been proud instead of terrified." Madison spoke up quietly. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us about Dad's struggles? We only knew about his success." "Because I wanted to protect you from worrying about money the way I had worried," Mom replied. "I wanted you to feel secure and supported. But somewhere along the way, my desire to provide security became a need to control outcomes. I started believing that there was only one path to success, one way to build a stable life." She turned back to me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. When you brought Emma home, I saw a dreamer who reminded me too much of your father's early uncertainty. When you dated Anna, I saw someone whose career demands would create the same stress I'd experienced as a young wife. When you fell in love with Jessica, I saw idealism that I was afraid wouldn't translate into practical stability. The pattern was becoming heartbreakingly clear. Mom hadn't been trying to sabotage my relationships or undermine my confidence. She'd been trying to save me from experiencing the fear and uncertainty that had defined her early marriage, not understanding that those experiences had also been the foundation for Dad's eventual success and their life together. I drove away 3 wonderful women who loved you, she said, her voice breaking. I questioned your business choices because they reminded me of your father's early struggles, not because I didn't believe in your abilities. I've been fighting ghosts from the past instead of supporting the man you've become. Uncle Robert reached across the table and placed his hand over Mom's. Sarah David never regretted those early struggles. He used to say they taught him more about his own capabilities than any success ever could. He was proud of the risks he'd taken, proud of the uncertainty he'd navigated. I know, Mom whispered. I knew it then, too. But fear makes you forget what you know to be true. Fear makes you try to control things that can't be controlled. Grandmother Rose spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived through enough decades to understand the long arc of human experience. Fear also makes you forget that the people you're trying to protect are capable of handling their own challenges. Jayden inherited his father's strength along with his creativity. He was never as fragile as you imagined him to be. Mom nodded, tears flowing freely now. He wasn't fragile at all. He was resilient. He kept pursuing his dreams, even when his own family questioned them. He built something beautiful and successful while protecting the woman he loves from people who should have been celebrating them both. She stood up again and walked around the table to where I was sitting. Without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around me in a hug that felt different from any embrace we'd shared in years. This wasn't the perfunctory hug of holiday greetings or the proud hug of conventional achievements. This was the hug of recognition, acceptance, and long overdue apology. I'm so proud of you, she whispered against my ear. I'm proud of your business, proud of your integrity, proud of the man you've become. And I'm proud that someone as wonderful as Sophia chose to share her life with you. You deserved better support from your family, and I promise we're going to do better moving forward. When she finally released me, I could see that everyone around the table had been affected by her words. Madison was crying again, but these were different tears. Craig looked like he was seeing his mother-in-law in an entirely new light. Uncle Robert was nodding with the recognition of someone who finally understood family dynamics that had puzzled him for years. But it was Sophia's expression that meant the most to me. She was looking at my mother with a mixture of compassion and respect that told me she understood the courage it had taken for Mom to examine her own motivations so honestly and to admit her mistakes so publicly. Mrs. Morrison, Sophia said gently, thank you for trusting me with that story. And thank you for raising a man who learned to pursue his dreams, even when it was difficult. That strength and determination are part of what I fell in love with. Mom smiled through her tears, really looking at Sophia for the first time all evening. Please call me Sarah. And thank you for loving my son well enough to be patient with his imperfect family. The emotional intensity of the evening had left all of us drained, but somehow lighter, as if years of accumulated misunderstandings and resentments had finally been acknowledged and released. The dining room that had felt charged with tension just hours earlier now felt warm and intimate, filled with the kind of vulnerability that can only exist when people choose honesty over comfort. Sophia excused herself to the restroom, and I watched my family's faces as she left the room. The defensive skepticism that had greeted her arrival had been completely replaced by genuine admiration and affection. Even Aunt Patricia, who was notoriously difficult to impress, was looking toward the hallway where Sophia had disappeared with something that looked remarkably like awe. "She's extraordinary," Grandmother Rose said simply. "Your father would have adored her." "She's too good for him," Uncle Robert added, but his tone was teasing rather than critical. "Though I suppose she's figured that out and decided to keep him anyway." When Sophia returned, she was carrying something in her hands that I recognized as the small gift bag she'd left by the front door when she'd arrived. Her expression was bright with the kind of excitement that suggested she'd been planning something special for this moment. "I have one more surprise," she announced, settling back into her chair with an almost mischievous smile. "Something I've been wanting to discuss with Jayden, but I thought it might be even better to share it with all of you." She reached into the bag and pulled out a thick folder bound with a ribbon. "I've been working with a wedding planner for the past month trying to figure out how to create a celebration that would honor our love while also acknowledging the importance of family. We've looked at venues all over Colorado, from mountain lodges to downtown hotels to botanical gardens." I felt my heart rate increase as I realized where this might be heading. Sophia and I had discussed the wedding countless times, always circling around the challenge of how to include my family without subjecting her to potential criticism or conflict. "But last week," she continued, "I realized I'd been approaching the whole thing backward. Instead of trying to find a place that felt right for our wedding, I should be asking whether we could make the right place feel perfect for our celebration." She untied the ribbon and opened the folder, revealing architectural drawings, landscape designs, and what appeared to be detailed event planning documents. "Sarah," she said, turning to my mother, "you have the most beautiful backyard I've ever seen. Those mature oak trees, the natural slope down toward the creek, the way the evening light filters through the leaves. I was wondering if you might consider letting us hold our wedding reception here." The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the entire house was holding its breath. Mom's mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound, while Madison leaned forward with obvious excitement. "You want to have your wedding here," Mom finally managed to say. "Not just the reception." Sophia clarified her enthusiasm growing as she spread the documents across the table. "The ceremony too? I've been working with a landscape designer who specializes in outdoor weddings. Look at these plans." She pointed to detailed drawings that showed the backyard transformed into an elegant outdoor venue. We could set up the ceremony space under the large oak tree with white chairs arranged in a semicircle, string lights throughout all the trees creating this magical canopy effect as the sun sets. A dance floor here on the level area near the deck with the catering station set up along the back of the house. Uncle Robert studied the plans with obvious fascination. "This would be incredible. How many people are you thinking?" "About 80 guests," Sophia replied. "Intimate enough to feel personal, large enough to include everyone who's important to us. Friends from work, college, friends, family, some of my colleagues from the law firm." Madison was practically bouncing in her seat. "Mom, this is perfect. Remember how we always talked about having events in the backyard when we were kids? This is like making those dreams come true on the most beautiful scale possible." But Mom was still staring at Sophia, as if she couldn't quite process what was being offered. "You want to include us?" she said slowly. "After everything that happened tonight, after the way we've treated you and Jayden, you want us to be part of your wedding." "I want you to be part of our marriage," Sophia corrected gently. "Weddings are just one day, but marriages are built on the foundation of community and support. Jayden loves you all deeply, despite the challenges you've faced as a family. That love is part of who he is, part of what I fell in love with, fell in love." She reached across the table and took Mom's hand. "I also believe that people can grow and change. tonight showed me that this family has the capacity for honesty, vulnerability, and genuine transformation. Those are exactly the qualities I want surrounding us as we start our married life together. Craig, who had been quietly absorbing everything, spoke up with obvious emotion. "This is incredibly generous, Sophia. After the way we all reacted when you first arrived, you have every right to want nothing to do with any of us." "But that's not what love does," Sophia replied. "Love doesn't keep score or hold grudges. Love creates opportunities for redemption and growth. Besides, I have a feeling this family is going to be a lot more fun once everyone stops trying to protect each other from imaginary dangers." I felt tears welling up in my eyes as I watched the woman I loved offer my family not just forgiveness, but inclusion in the most important day of our lives. After years of protecting her from their judgment here, she was choosing to trust them with our celebration. "There's one more thing," Sophia added, pulling out another set of documents. "Madison, I was wondering if you might be interested in helping design some of the wedding materials. The invitations program's decorative elements. I saw your reaction to those art supplies. And I have a feeling you have talents that haven't been fully utilized." Madison's eyes filled with tears again. "You would trust me with something that important? I would be honored to have your creative input," Sophia said sincerely. "This whole evening has shown me how much artistic sensitivity runs in this family. I think you could create something beautiful and meaningful for our celebration." She turned to Uncle Robert. "I was also hoping you might consider handling the music. Jayden told me about your incredible record collection and your knowledge of jazz and blues. We'd love to have someone who really understands music curate the soundtrack for our day." Uncle Robert's gruff exterior cracked completely. "I would be privileged to do that for you both. Aunt Patricia," Sophia continued, "I've heard you're an amazing cook and that you've coordinated events for your neighborhood association. Would you be willing to work with our caterer to make sure the menu reflects the kind of comfort and warmth this family is known for?" Aunt Patricia was crying now, too overwhelmed by being included in such meaningful ways. "Of course, dear, it would be my pleasure. And Craig," Sophia said, "Jayden mentioned that you're a wonderful photographer when you're not working at the hospital. Would you consider being our official wedding photographer? We'd much rather have someone who knows and loves this family capturing our memories than a stranger, however professional." By this point, everyone around the table was emotional. The generous spirit Sophia was showing, the way she was choosing to bind our families together rather than create division, was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Grandmother rose. Sophia said finally, "I was hoping you might be willing to perform a reading during the ceremony. Something about love, family, and the importance of supporting each other's dreams." Grandmother Rose nodded, her own eyes bright with tears. "I would be deeply honored, dear." Mom stood up suddenly and walked around the table to embrace Sophia. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving us a chance to be the family we should have been all along." The next hour was a whirlwind of excited planning and emotional reconciliation. Madison and Mom began discussing decorating ideas with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen from either of them in years. Uncle Robert started making notes about musical selections that would work for both ceremony and reception. Craig was already thinking about photography angles and lighting considerations. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Mom pulled me aside as the evening was winding down. "Your father would be so proud," she said quietly. "Not just of your success, but of the man you've become. The way you've handled tonight, the grace you've shown in forgiving us, the wisdom you showed in protecting Sophia, until you knew we were ready to appreciate her." He always said that the measure of a person wasn't what they achieved, but how they treated people who had hurt them. "I learned that from him," I replied, "and from you when you were at your best." She smiled through fresh tears. "I promise we're going to be at our best from now on. This family is going to support your dreams and celebrate your achievements the way we always should have. As Sophia and I prepared to leave that evening, arms full of leftover food and hearts full of hope, I realized that this Christmas dinner had become something none of us had expected. What started as a painful confrontation had transformed into a genuine healing experience that would change our family dynamics forever. But the biggest surprise came the next morning when I woke up to find Madison had posted something on her social media that made me laugh and cry at the same time. Sometimes the people you think you know best are the ones who surprise you most. My brother Jayden has spent the past 3 years building an incredible business and finding an amazing partner while I've been too caught up in my own insecurities to celebrate his achievements. Last night, he and his fiancée Sophia reminded our whole family what it means to love unconditionally and support each other's dreams. I'm proud to be his sister, excited to be part of their wedding, and grateful for second chances at being the family we're supposed to be. 3 months later, on a perfect May evening, 80 people gathered in Mom's backyard to celebrate love, forgiveness, and the beauty of family bonds that grow stronger through honest struggle rather than in spite of it. Madison's artistic touches were everywhere, from hand calligraphied programs to elegant centerpieces that reflected both sophistication and warmth. Uncle Robert's musical choices created the perfect atmosphere for both solemnity and celebration. Aunt Patricia's menu coordination resulted in food that was both delicious and meaningful. Craig's photographs captured not just the event, but the genuine joy and connection that filled every moment. And Grandmother Rose's reading, chosen from a collection of poems about love and growth that Dad had given Mom during their early years together, brought tears to every eye present as she spoke about the courage required to love fully and the wisdom needed to support each other's dreams. As Sophia and I danced our first dance as husband and wife under the string lights that transformed Mom's backyard into something magical, I realized that this was what I'd always wanted, but had been afraid to hope for: a family that celebrated love instead of questioning it, that supported dreams instead of cautioning against them, that chose growth over comfort and connection over control. The little boy who had once felt misunderstood and unsupported was gone, replaced by a man who understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people you love is the opportunity to become better than they've been before. So I want to ask you something that's been on my mind since that Christmas dinner that changed everything. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where protecting yourself meant missing out on deeper connections with people you care about? How do you balance setting healthy boundaries with staying open to the possibility that people can grow and change? And what would it look like in your own life to extend the kind of grace that creates space for healing rather than just protecting yourself from further hurt? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and sharing it with someone who might benefit from hearing about the power of forgiveness and second chances. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family relationships and the complicated but beautiful journey of building authentic connections with the people who matter most. Thanks for listening to my story, and I hope your own family relationships are filled with the kind of understanding, support, and love that everyone deserves. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to become the family you're supposed to be.